Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Mark's mind raced as he walked back through the rain-soaked streets, Eleanor's words still echoing in his head. A business arrangement, she had said. A companion. The offer sounded like something straight out of a bad movie, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it might be his only way out. His father's debts loomed over him like a storm cloud, and with every step he took, the weight of his responsibilities pressed harder against his chest. He had always prided himself on doing things on his own, never asking for help. But now, here was this woman, offering him a lifeline, asking for nothing more than his name in return. The more he thought about it, the more tempting it became. He was out of options. He had to admit that to himself. When Mark arrived back at his apartment, it felt colder than usual. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her face drawn and pale. She looked up as he entered, and there was a heaviness in her eyes, the kind of look that made his stomach turn. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. Mark didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to your mother that a stranger had just offered you a way out of all your problems, but it came with a price? He sighed and sat down across from her. His mother's eyes widened slightly. She knew the pressure he was under, but she wasn't expecting him to make such a drastic decision. Mark hesitated. He could see the concern in her eyes, the worry that always crept in whenever money was mentioned. She had always been strong for him, but he could tell that this was breaking her, just as much as it was breaking him. How could he not take the offer? But what would it cost him? He had to weigh the consequences, not just for him, but for her too. The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Mark's mother sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. He could see the thoughts racing through her mind. This was madness, she must have thought, but she also understood how dire the situation was. She took a deep breath, then looked at him, her gaze steady. "Mark, you're my son, and I love you. But I know what it's like to be desperate. If this woman can truly help us, maybe you have to consider it." Her voice faltered for just a moment before she continued. "But promise me you'll think this through. Don't let anyone take advantage of you, okay?" She paused, her eyes softening. "And don't lose yourself in the process. This is your life." She smiled faintly. "I just want you to be happy." Mark looked at her, his heart heavy with guilt. How could he tell her that part of him was already considering it? The offer was too good, too easy. But what did it say about him? Could he really marry a woman he didn't know, for reasons that had nothing to do with love? The next morning, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of dread in his chest as he prepared for his meeting with Eleanor. He had already made up his mind, though. His family's future depended on it. He dressed in his best suit, the one he could barely afford, and made his way to the bistro. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of rich coffee and fresh pastries filled the air. He could already see Eleanor sitting at a corner table, looking as composed and polished as ever. She looked up as he approached, her lips curving into a smile that seemed almost too perfect. "Mr. Davis," she greeted him. "I'm glad you decided to join me again. I trust you've thought about my offer." Her eyes sparkled with an unreadable expression. Mark took a deep breath and sat down across from her. "I've thought about it," he said. "And I'm willing to go through with it. I'm ready to accept your offer." His words felt surreal as they left his mouth, but he knew it was the only way forward. For a moment, Eleanor didn't say anything. She just studied him, her gaze piercing. Then, with a nod, she spoke. "Good. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. You'll be married within the week. But remember, this is not a real marriage. There will be no emotions involved, only mutual benefit." "Do you understand?" she asked, her tone cool and professional. Mark nodded slowly, his mind swirling with doubt, but also relief. He had made his choice. The paperwork would be signed, the deal sealed. He would marry this woman for the future of his family. But even as he agreed, something deep inside him told him this might be the biggest mistake of his life. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of paperwork, meetings with Eleanor's lawyer, and a growing sense of unease. Mark found himself in a whirlwind of decisions he never imagined he'd have to make. He had always prided himself on his independence, but now, he was preparing to marry a woman he barely knew, all in the name of securing his family's future. Eleanor had made it clear from the start this was a business arrangement, not a romance. There would be no emotional connection. But deep down, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something important was slipping through his fingers. The wedding ceremony was small, quiet, and efficient. There were no flowers, no music, no friends or family to witness the union, just Eleanor, her lawyer, and a notary. Mark stood in a black suit that felt too tight, staring at the polished floor of the courthouse. His heart was heavy with uncertainty, but he knew he had made this choice for a reason. As the officiant spoke the final words, Mark glanced at Eleanor, her expression unreadable. She wasn't smiling, but then again, neither was he. This wasn't supposed to be a day for joy. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Eleanor's eyes met his. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis," she said, her voice calm, but there was a hint of something else there, something Mark couldn't quite place. He nodded stiffly, not knowing how to respond. What was he supposed to feel in this moment? Relief? Regret? He wasn't sure. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Mark returned to his small apartment, now under the shadow of a decision he couldn't undo. The agreement had been signed. His mother had been ecstatic when he told her the news, but Mark couldn't bring himself to share the details. He could already hear her hopes for him in her voice, how she believed this was the break he needed. But he wasn't so sure. That evening, Mark met Eleanor at her estate for the first time. As he drove up the long driveway, the mansion loomed ahead, its towering columns and pristine stone facade giving it the appearance of a museum rather than a home. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he pulled up in front of the entrance. The difference in their worlds had never felt more stark. Inside, the house was just as grand as the exterior. The marble floors, antique furniture, and dark oak panels created a cold, almost impersonal atmosphere. Eleanor greeted him in the foyer with the same calm demeanor she always had. She led him up to a guest room that was large enough to fit an entire apartment. It was elegant, but again, there was a sense of emptiness to it, as if the space had been designed for someone who didn't need a personal connection. "I trust you will be comfortable here," Eleanor said, her voice detached as she gestured toward the lavish surroundings. "I've arranged for everything to be taken care of. You'll find the amenities to your liking. If you need anything, just let me know." Her words were kind, but there was no warmth in them, no hint of genuine care. It was all part of the arrangement. Mark nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was the beginning of his new life. But even as he unpacked his things in the oversized closet, his mind kept drifting back to the life he had left behind. The small apartment, the late nights studying, the constant worry over money, it all seemed so far away now. But was it really a better life? He wasn't sure anymore. The following days passed in a blur of new routines. Eleanor kept her distance, and Mark found himself following the set rules of their marriage. They attended social events together, but there were no private moments, no intimate conversations. Eleanor was always polite, but never warm. She treated him like an employee, not a husband. It felt like he was playing a role in a play, and the script was written for him, but not by him. Mark had hoped, even for a moment, that something might change, that maybe he'd feel something for her, or maybe she'd begin to soften towards him. But as the days went on, it became clearer that this was a business arrangement, and nothing more. He tried to tell himself it was for the best. His family's future was secure now. But with every passing day, a part of him began to question if this was really the life he wanted. One evening, Eleanor invited him to a charity gala. He was still getting used to the high society world she lived in. He had never been to an event like this before, and he felt out of place in his tuxedo, surrounded by people who seemed so polished and confident. Eleanor, on the other hand, glided through the crowd effortlessly. She was the center of attention, as always, and Mark found himself standing off to the side, watching her, wondering what it would feel like to be more than just a prop in her world. As the night wore on, Eleanor was pulled away by a group of investors, leaving Mark standing alone. He could feel the loneliness creeping in again, the same loneliness he had felt when he first walked into her world. He had hoped this arrangement would bring him some peace, but now, he wasn't so sure. Would he ever feel like he belonged here? Or had he simply traded one kind of isolation for another? As the gala continued, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life. Eleanor was not the woman he had imagined she would be. She was kind in her own way, but she kept everyone at arm's length, including him. Was this really the way forward? Or had he made a mistake he would regret forever? Mark sat in the back of the luxurious town car as it glided smoothly through the city streets, the headlights casting long shadows on the pavement. Eleanor was sitting across from him, her eyes focused on the phone in her hand, scrolling through messages. The silence between them felt heavier than ever, and Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of his own thoughts. He had been married to Eleanor for 2 weeks now, and yet it felt like he was still a stranger in her world. Their interactions were polite, nothing more. He played his part in this strange, silent marriage, attending events with her, sitting through dinners, and speaking only when necessary. But with each passing day, the isolation he felt only grew. He had hoped that somewhere along the way, he might find a connection, something real. But that connection had yet to appear. The car pulled up to a massive, glittering building, and Mark could see the bright lights of the gala reflecting off the glass windows. Eleanor's social events were always extravagant, and tonight was no exception. The crowd gathered inside was a sea of expensive suits and sparkling gowns. Mark stepped out of the car behind Eleanor, following her as she moved through the crowd like a queen in her own kingdom. She was a woman who was used to being the center of attention, and the people around her responded to her every word, every smile, with adoration. As they entered the ballroom, Mark felt the eyes of the guests on them. Eleanor, with her graceful presence, was a star. And Mark? He was just a shadow, walking behind her. Mark had tried to enjoy these events, to fit into this world of wealth and luxury. But it was always the same. He never truly felt like he belonged. He couldn't understand the conversations, the deals being made, the lives being lived in a way that seemed so far removed from his own. He felt like an outsider, always on the edge, never truly part of the glittering world Eleanor inhabited. As they made their way to a table, Eleanor took her seat, and Mark followed suit. A waiter approached them with a glass of wine, which Eleanor accepted with a polite smile, but Mark couldn't bring himself to take a sip. His nerves were on edge, the entire evening making him feel like he was playing a role in a life he didn't know how to live. As the evening wore on, Mark's mind wandered. The people around him laughed and conversed, but he found it hard to concentrate. His thoughts kept drifting back to his life before all this: his small apartment, his mother's illness, his father's debts. This extravagant world felt empty by comparison, like a beautiful shell with nothing inside. Eleanor was always surrounded by people, yet he had never felt more alone. He glanced over at her, watching as she spoke to a group of investors, her words sharp, confident, and cold. She was in her element, but to Mark, it was clear she was not looking for anyone to connect with. She was playing a part, just as he was. But the difference was that she didn't need to act. This was her world. This was who she was. She had everything she could possibly want, yet she remained distant, unreachable. It was like she had built a fortress around herself, one that Mark could never break through. The evening dragged on, and Mark found himself slipping further into his thoughts. It wasn't just the loneliness that bothered him, it was the realization that maybe he had made a mistake. He had married Eleanor, but he didn't know her. He didn't know her dreams, her fears, her desires. All he knew was that she was a woman with everything he needed to survive, a woman who had offered him a deal, a way out of the suffocating world of debt. But in exchange for his freedom, he had given up something far more important: his ability to feel connected, to feel alive. As the night wore on, Mark couldn't ignore the growing tension in his chest. Was this really what he wanted? Was he willing to sacrifice his own happiness, his own sense of self, just to keep his family safe? He had always told himself that he would do whatever it took to protect them, but at what cost? The longer he spent in Eleanor's world, the more he realized that he was losing himself. His mother's hopes, his sister's dreams, his own future, they all rested on this deal. But was it enough? Could he live a life like this forever? Finally, the event came to an end, and Mark followed Eleanor as they made their way to the exit. As they walked back to the car, Eleanor didn't say a word. She was lost in her own thoughts, just as he was. The car ride back was quiet, and Mark couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief as the lights of the gala faded behind them. It was over. But as they pulled into the driveway of her mansion, Mark knew that this was just the beginning of a life he wasn't sure he was ready for. Would he ever find a way to truly be himself again? Or had he already given up too much to ever go back? Mark had spent days trying to adjust to the reality of his new life, but the emptiness in his chest only seemed to grow with each passing day. The grand mansion, the elegant parties, the business dinners, all of it felt like a world he didn't belong to. Eleanor was always poised, always professional, but the warmth he had hoped for, the connection he had craved, never came. She treated him like a business partner, nothing more. There were no conversations about life, no moments of shared vulnerability. It was a contract, nothing more, and Mark couldn't help but wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. One evening, as he sat alone in the lavish guest room, Mark found himself staring out the window at the sprawling gardens below. The lights from the city cast a soft glow over the landscape, but the beauty of it all felt distant, like something he could never fully embrace. He had promised himself that this would be temporary, that he would find a way to make it work for his family. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized that the person he was becoming wasn't the person he wanted to be. He had tried to talk to Eleanor a few times, to ask her about her past, her dreams, the things that made her who she was. But every time he broached the subject, she would change the topic or give a vague answer. She was always polite, but never open. It was as if she was locked in her own world, a world where no one could reach her, not even him. It was a lonely existence, and Mark was beginning to feel the weight of it. Mark had hoped that their marriage might evolve into something more. He told himself that with time, they would find a connection, a spark. But every attempt to bridge the gap between them only felt more strained. Eleanor was distant, focused on her work and her empire. And Mark was left to play his part, going through the motions but never truly living. One morning, after another quiet breakfast with Eleanor, Mark decided that he couldn't keep going like this. He had to face the truth. He had become a prisoner of his own decisions. He had traded his happiness for security, and now he felt trapped in a life that wasn't his own. He couldn't live like this anymore, pretending that everything was fine when inside, he felt like he was drowning. He decided to confront Eleanor. It had been a long time coming, but Mark knew that if he didn't speak up now, he would lose himself completely. As he entered her office, he found her sitting at her desk, reviewing documents. She looked up at him, her expression as unreadable as always. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his sudden appearance. "What is it, Mark?" she asked, her voice steady but not warm. Mark took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said, his voice more uncertain than he would have liked. "About this arrangement." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I feel like I'm living someone else's life, and I can't breathe in this cage you've built around us. We're not even friends, Eleanor. We're just strangers with a contract." His words spilled out in a rush, and for the first time since this all started, he felt like he was finally speaking his truth. For a moment, there was silence. Eleanor didn't speak, but her eyes seemed to harden, just a little. She set her pen down and leaned back in her chair, studying him. "I see," she said finally, her voice cool, almost detached. "You don't like this arrangement anymore. I understand." She stood up from her desk and walked toward the window, her back to him. "But this was never about love, Mark. It was always about practicality. We both agreed to this." She turned to face him, her expression impassive. "And I expect you to keep your part of the deal." Her words stung, but Mark couldn't deny the truth in them. This was what he had signed up for. Mark clenched his fists at his sides, frustration boiling up inside him. "You don't get it, do you?" he snapped, his voice rising. "I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for a life where I'm invisible, where I'm just a tool to fix your problems. I thought we could have something real, but you don't even want that, do you? You don't care about me, about us. You just care about your empire. The words felt raw, and for a moment, he felt like he had just unleashed a storm inside himself. Eleanor's face didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe regret. Maybe guilt. But she quickly masked it, her composure returning. I'm sorry you feel that way, she said quietly. But this is who I am. I never promised you anything other than what we agreed upon. Her tone was final, and Mark could see that there was no room for negotiation. He was just another part of her carefully constructed world, a world where emotions didn't matter. Mark turned away, his heart heavy. This was the truth he had been avoiding, the realization that he had built his life on a lie. And now, there was no turning back. The days after his confrontation with Eleanor felt like a fog. Mark had hoped for some kind of resolution, some breakthrough where things would change, but nothing had. Eleanor remained the same, distant, reserved, almost indifferent to his pain. The cold, formal nature of their marriage only deepened the divide between them. He had tried to push past his feelings, but the loneliness and frustration weighed heavily on him. Each day, Mark found himself more disillusioned with the life he had chosen. The mansion, once a symbol of escape, now felt like a gilded cage. He spent his days in the library, in the study, or attending events with Eleanor, but it was all so empty. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was slowly losing himself. The man he had been before, the one full of ambition and hope, seemed like a distant memory. One afternoon, Mark sat in the quiet of the study, staring out the window at the sprawling estate. The garden was beautiful, yes, but it felt lifeless to him. Eleanor had asked him to meet her at a charity event that evening, but as usual, the thought of attending made him dread the fake smile he'd have to wear. He'd become a master at pretending, but deep inside, he knew it wasn't sustainable. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her figure framed by the soft light of the hallway. Her presence was always commanding, but today, Mark noticed something different in her. There was a slight tension in her posture, something almost vulnerable that he had never seen before. "Mark," she said, her voice softer than usual. "We need to talk. I've been thinking about what you said." She paused, her eyes not meeting his. "I know this arrangement hasn't been easy on you. And I know I haven't been the easiest person to be around." Her words surprised him. Eleanor was not known for admitting any weakness, but there it was an opening, however small. Mark looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't like her. She had always been so controlled, so unapproachable. Was this just another part of the deal? Or was it possible that Eleanor was starting to see the cracks in their perfect arrangement? He took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Eleanor. You've made it clear that this is just business for you. And that's fine, but it's not fine for me. I can't keep doing this." His voice wavered despite his best efforts, and he could see her finally looking at him with a hint of understanding. "I know," she said quietly. "I know it's not fair to you. And maybe I've been too focused on myself, on my work." She walked further into the room, sitting down across from him. "I never intended for you to feel like this. I know this isn't the life you wanted." There was a long pause before she spoke again, her tone almost apologetic. "But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to change what we've created." Her words were raw, stripped of the usual barriers she put up. Mark felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by doubt. Was this genuine? Was she just saying what he wanted to hear? "Maybe it's too late," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we've both gone too far down this road. I can't keep pretending this is something it's not." He stood up, walking over to the window to collect his thoughts. There was a long silence between them. Mark felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the truth of their situation settling in. He had never imagined he would be in this position, married to someone who was practically a stranger, living a life that felt foreign to him. But now, with Eleanor's unexpected vulnerability, he began to wonder if there was a way forward. Was there hope for them, or had they reached an impasse? "Maybe we can figure this out," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know what that looks like, but I don't want to lose you, Mark." Not like this. Her words were hesitant, but for the first time, there was sincerity in her eyes. Mark turned to face her, his emotions swirling. Could he really consider staying? Could they make this work? Or was he just holding onto a fleeting hope that things would change? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: this was no longer just about the contract. It was about something deeper, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face yet. I don't know, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I don't know if we can fix this, Eleanor. But I'm willing to try. For both of us. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like there was a chance. A chance for something real. As the evening wore on, Mark and Eleanor sat together in silence, no longer bound by the cold formality of their contract, but by a tentative understanding that perhaps, just perhaps, they could start again. It wasn't going to be easy, but Mark wasn't ready to give up on the possibility of a future with her, even if it was uncertain. The days that followed felt different, lighter in some ways, but still heavy with the weight of their unspoken truths. Mark and Eleanor had begun to find small moments of connection, moments that didn't feel like they were playing a part, but they were still so fragile, so tentative. They spoke more, shared more about their lives, their fears, even their dreams. But each time Mark looked at Eleanor, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still holding her back, something she wasn't ready to share with him. Still, he tried. He wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real out of what had started as a business arrangement. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Mark found himself alone in the study, staring out the window at the darkening sky. He felt unsettled, as if the piece they had started to build was about to slip through his fingers. There was still so much he didn't understand about Eleanor, about her past, her choices, why she had built this fortress around herself. And every time he tried to get closer, she pulled away, just a little. He was beginning to wonder if he could ever truly reach her. As he sat in the dim light, his thoughts consumed by what Eleanor had said, the idea that she didn't want to lose him, Mark wondered if she truly meant it. She had always been so focused on her business, her empire. Could she actually allow herself to be vulnerable with him? Could she let him in? Or was he just another part of her carefully constructed life, a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He turned to see Eleanor standing in the doorway, her expression serious, but there was a softness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "Mark," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" She stepped inside, and for the first time, he noticed how tired she looked. It wasn't the usual cool composure, but something deeper. A weariness that made her seem more human, more real. Mark nodded, his heart skipping a beat. There was something about her presence tonight that felt different, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. Maybe this was the moment they had both been waiting for, the moment they would truly understand each other. She walked over to the window, standing beside him as they both looked out at the night. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like they were both gathering the courage to say what needed to be said. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know this hasn't been easy," she began. "And I know I haven't been fair to you. I've kept so much of myself hidden, even from you. But lately, I've started to realize maybe I've been running from what I really need." She paused, as if struggling with the words. "I've spent so much of my life building walls, protecting myself from everything and everyone. But with you, I feel like I'm starting to let them down. And it scares me. I don't know if I'm ready for that. But I want to try. I want to try with you." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The vulnerability in her words was so unexpected, so raw, that for a moment, he couldn't speak. He had always seen Eleanor as someone untouchable, someone who had it all together, but here she was broken, just like him. He realized then that he hadn't been the only one trapped by the weight of their arrangement. She had been carrying her own burdens, just in a different way. Without thinking, Mark reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to be ready," he said quietly. "I'm here, Eleanor. I'm here for whatever you need. We don't have to have it all figured out. We can take it one step at a time." His words were sincere, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a connection to her, a real one. Eleanor looked at him, her expression softening. She nodded slowly, as if processing what he had said. The walls between them were still there, but they were no longer as impenetrable as before. There was a possibility now, a chance for something more. "Maybe we can start over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we can try to make this work for us, not just for the contract." She squeezed his hand gently, and for the first time, Mark felt a flicker of hope, the kind that he hadn't dared to believe in for so long. As they stood there together in the quiet, Mark knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more struggles, more moments of doubt, but for the first time, he felt like they were on the same path, moving towards something real, something that didn't depend on contracts or promises but on trust and the willingness to open up. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of tension and relief. Mark and Eleanor had started to make small changes in their relationship, but it was clear that the path they were walking wasn't an easy one. They spent more time together, talking more openly, but there was still a wall between them, one built from years of emotional distance. Mark had hoped that with time, they would find a way to tear it down. But some days, it felt like they were stuck, unable to move forward, unsure of where they truly stood. Mark began to see Eleanor in a new light. She wasn't the unapproachable billionaire he had first met. She was, in many ways, as lost as he was. She had spent so much of her life building walls, focusing on her empire, that she had forgotten how to connect with the people around her. It wasn't just him she had pushed away, it was everyone. He could see that now. But it didn't make the journey any easier. One evening, after a quiet dinner in the mansion's grand dining room, Eleanor asked Mark to join her in the living room. She was standing by the large windows, looking out over the garden, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She seemed deep in thought, her usually composed demeanor slightly off. Mark could tell that something was different, something was on her mind. "Mark," she began, her voice calm but hesitant. "I've been thinking about everything we've been through. I know things haven't been perfect, but I don't want to keep pretending. I don't want to keep living in this limbo. I think I owe you more than just the contract we signed. I want to be real with you." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "I want to try, for real. Not just because of the deal we made, but because I think we deserve a chance to figure this out. I don't know if I'm ready for everything, but I want to take the first step." She paused, a look of vulnerability crossing her face. "What do you think?" Her question hung in the air, and for the first time, Mark could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't the confident, untouchable woman he had married. She was just a person, trying to figure out how to love again. Mark stood still for a moment, taking in her words. His heart raced, a mixture of emotions flooding through him. Part of him had always wanted this, wanted to truly connect with her, to break through the barriers that had kept them apart. But another part of him was still unsure, still scared of getting hurt again. It was a leap of faith, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to take it. But then he realized, maybe that was the point. Maybe he wasn't supposed to have it all figured out. Maybe it was okay to take small steps, to allow himself to be vulnerable, just as Eleanor was. Slowly, he took a step toward her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I think we can try," Mark said, his heart pounding. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to take that first step with you. We don't have to have all the answers right now. But I want to see where this can go. I want to try, too." His words were sincere, and he could see the relief in Eleanor's eyes. She had been waiting for him to say that, to give her the same chance she was offering him. Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more to me than you know." She reached out and took his hand, the connection between them feeling more real than it had ever been. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt like they were on the same page, moving forward together. As they stood there, hand in hand, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would be moments of doubt, moments when they would wonder if they were doing the right thing. But for now, they had each other. And that was enough. Mark knew that the journey they were about to take would be challenging, but it was also the beginning of something new. Something that wasn't just about survival or contracts, but about real, genuine connection. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor slowly built a new foundation together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They spent more time talking, learning about each other's pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Slowly, Eleanor let down the walls she had spent years constructing, and Mark realized that she wasn't the cold, unfeeling woman he had first met. She had her own scars, her own vulnerabilities. And as they grew closer, he began to see her in a different light, not as the powerful businesswoman who had made an offer, but as someone who had been lonely too, someone who wanted connection as much as he did. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Mark found himself looking at Eleanor in a way he hadn't before. They were sitting on the couch, her head resting against his shoulder, their hands intertwined. He had once thought this moment would never come, that they would always remain two people trapped in a marriage of convenience. But here they were, together, sharing something genuine. Mark felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. "I never thought it would be like this," Mark said softly, his fingers tracing small patterns on her hand. "I thought we'd just go through the motions, finish this contract, and move on. But now, I don't know. I think I found something real here. Something I didn't even know I needed." Eleanor turned her head slightly to look at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I didn't expect this either," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was just protecting myself, building walls so no one could hurt me. But maybe I've been pushing people away for too long. Maybe it's time I let someone in." Mark looked at her, his heart full. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Eleanor," he said, his voice sincere. "But I do know that I want to find out. I want to build something with you, not because we have to, but because we want to." Eleanor's smile grew wider, and she squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way, Mark. We don't need to have it all figured out right now. We can take it one day at a time. But I think, for the first time in a long time, we're both on the same page." And just like that, the final barrier between them seemed to fall away. The uncertainty, the fear, the doubt, all of it seemed to vanish as they sat together, two people who had found something unexpected in each other. It wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for the first time, Mark felt like he was truly home. As the months passed, they continued to navigate their new life together. The formalities of their marriage were no longer the center of their relationship. They had come to understand each other in ways they hadn't thought possible. Eleanor no longer seemed distant, and Mark no longer felt like he was playing a role in someone else's story. They were writing their own. One evening, as they walked through the garden of their estate, Eleanor stopped and turned to him. She smiled, a genuine, soft smile that reached her eyes. "Mark," she said, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we took that chance. I'm glad we decided to see where this could go." Mark smiled back, his heart full. "Me too, Eleanor. Me too." And for the first time, as they stood together in the soft glow of the setting sun, Mark realized that sometimes, the best things in life come when you least expect them. He had come into this marriage searching for a way out of his problems, but what he had found was far more valuable than anything he could have imagined. He had found love unexpected, messy, and real. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story.